6 months after the supposed accident that killed my husband, his younger brother, who stood to inherit everything, arrived at my remote mountain lodge with paperwork confirming I was mentally unfit to manage the estate. He claimed the money was for the good of my children. I recognized the subtle poisoning attempt from months ago and realized the accident wasn't random. I signed the papers agreeing to the terms. What he didn't see was the small waterproof recorder I had pinned to my collar, capturing his full, gloating confession. My name is Eleanor Ellie Vance. 6 months ago, my entire world shattered when my husband Arthur was killed in a kayaking accident on the river that runs past our remote lodge in the Rocky Mountains. David, my 10-year-old son, and I moved through the weeks in a fog of grief and isolation, punctuated only by the occasional visit from Arthur's younger brother, Caleb. Caleb, the ambitious, impeccably tailored younger sibling, who always stood in Arthur's shadow. Caleb, who now stood to inherit almost everything thanks to a complex, outdated family trust that prioritized the male lineage if the widow was deemed incapable. I should have seen him coming. The subtle signs of his cruelty had always been there, but grief had blinded me. The first clue. The truth about the accident started to surface 2 months ago when I was finally well enough to organize Arthur's old files. I found a detailed medical report from a doctor in Denver. It wasn't recent. It was dated 8 months ago, 4 weeks before the supposed accident. The diagnosis was baffling. Arthur had presented with acute severe gastrointestinal distress and neurological confusion symptoms the doctor couldn't explain. I remembered that week. Arthur had been violently ill after a dinner Caleb attended. We brushed it off as bad takeout. But reading the medical report, I realized the symptoms described were eerily similar to slow-acting thallium poisoning. Suddenly, the accident wasn't random. Arthur, a champion kayaker, wouldn't have drowned. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Caleb hadn't just benefited from Arthur's death. He had orchestrated it. He had spent months subtly weakening Arthur, ensuring the eventual accident would look like a tragic mistake made by an unwell man. My grief immediately curdled into a cold, terrifying need for justice. I knew I couldn't confront him. I was alone, isolated, and he was protected by money and plausible deniability. I had to wait for him to make the final move, the visit. That move came last Tuesday. Caleb drove up the long, winding dirt road to the lodge in his pristine black SUV. He looked exactly like the corporate shark he was, expensive suit, polished shoes, and a briefcase clutched like a weapon. "Ellie, my dear," he said, stepping into the rustic living room, his eyes scanning the space for signs of instability. "I'm so sorry to intrude, but it's time we talk about the estate. For David's future." He opened his briefcase, revealing a sheaf of documents. Arthur's unfortunate passing has triggered a clause in the Vance family trust to ensure the financial security of the children, particularly given your recent instability. The trust requires that control of the estate assets be transferred to a more suitable manager. He pushed the documents across the antique table. The heading read, "Declaration of Incapacity and Transfer of Financial Guardianship." These documents, Caleb continued, a barely concealed smirk playing on his lips, confirm your diagnosis of severe adjustment disorder with features of incapacitating depression and paranoia. It's all based on the reports from the therapists I arranged for you and a consultation with a private physician. Don't worry, they're very sympathetic to your situation. I felt the blood boil beneath my skin. He had bought off my grief counselors and a doctor to create a paper trail proving I was mentally unfit. He was not just stealing David's inheritance. He was destroying my credibility. I looked at the signature line. Signing meant giving him full, irreversible control over Arthur's multi-million-dollar business and David's entire inheritance. Refusing meant a messy public court battle that Caleb was already positioned to win. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply took the pen. "It's for David," I whispered, playing the role of the defeated, fragile widow. "If it secures his future, I'll sign anything." Caleb beamed, a predatory, victorious smile flashing across his face. "A very wise decision, Ellie," he said, reaching for the papers. "You've done the right thing. Now let's talk about the next steps." What he didn't see was the small, waterproof, voice-activated recorder I had discreetly pinned to the collar of my thick wool sweater just before he arrived. I signed the documents, but I had just bought myself an audience with a murderer, and I needed him to talk. I held my breath as I signed the last line on the Declaration of Incapacity. My hand was steady, but my heart was a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I managed a weak, defeated smile as I pushed the stack of papers back across the table to Caleb. "It's done," I whispered, playing the role of the frail, dependent widow. "Just please tell me what happens next with David's education fund. Arthur always wanted him to go to the academy." Caleb took the papers, his fingers lingering on my signature. The victory in his eyes was absolute and corrosive. He saw me as harmless, broken, and completely in his power. He tucked the signed documents securely into his briefcase, snapping the lock shut with a confident click. The sound was deafening. "Oh, the academy," Caleb mused, leaning back in the rustic armchair, looking completely out of place and enjoying the spectacle. "Yes, well, the academy is rather expensive, Ellie. And the truth is, with the trust fully under my management, we'll need to make some adjustments." The revelation of motive. I kept my gaze down nervously, twisting my wedding ring, allowing him to feel superior. The tiny recorder pinned to my sweater collar was silent, waiting. "Adjustments," I repeated, my voice wavering. "But Arthur promised." "Arthur promised a lot of things he couldn't deliver, dear sister," Caleb interrupted, dropping the polite facade entirely. "The truth is, Arthur was running the company into the ground with his moral business practices. The market demands aggression, not ethics. His stubbornness was going to ruin the Vance name." He stood up and began pacing the rug, no longer concerned with appearances. He was ready to boast. Arthur's death, while tragic, was necessary. It freed up the capital, and more importantly, it removed the obstacle. Now I have full control, and I can finally execute my merger plan without his sentimental interference. My entire body went cold. It wasn't just about money. It was about Arthur's legacy. He hadn't died in a random tragic accident. He had been eliminated for standing in Caleb's way. The gloating confession. "You know the reports were accurate," Caleb said, stopping by the huge stone fireplace and smiling at his own reflection. "Arthur was actually quite a difficult man to poison. I had to administer the thallium in small cumulative doses over nearly a month. That dinner we had here, the one where he insisted on making his disgusting homemade chili, that was the final critical dose." I stifled a gasp, forcing the air back into my lungs. He confirmed it. "Thallium poisoning. The same poison hinted at in the medical report. The best part," he continued, completely lost in his own arrogance, "was how simple the staged accident was. Arthur was so weak, so confused from the neurological effects, the paranoia, the dizziness, that he never even had a chance when the kayak flipped. It looked like a genuine tragic drowning of a sick man. Brilliant, really." He picked up a heavy, carved wooden photo frame from the mantelpiece. A frame I had made for Arthur. He examined the photo of David and Arthur, then scoffed. "And now I get the business, the lodge, and full financial control over the only thing Arthur ever truly cared about, his son. You, Ellie, are going to be living in a tiny condo in town under the care of a court-appointed fiduciary, and David will attend the public school. All perfectly legal, all arranged by the sympathetic younger brother." He tossed the photo frame back onto the mantel. "You've been a surprisingly easy target, Ellie. Grief makes people pliable. And paranoid. You'll sign anything, believe anything. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to save and a fortune to double." The exit. Caleb strode to the door, feeling completely victorious. He paused, looking back at my seemingly broken figure. "One final thing, Ellie," he added, a cruel afterthought. "Don't try to leave the lodge. My driver will be monitoring the road to ensure your mental health is stable. We don't want any unfortunate incidents before the court confirms your guardianship status, do we?" He slammed the door, leaving the silence of the remote lodge to rush back in. The sound of his SUV engine faded down the driveway. I didn't move for 10 minutes. Then, with painstaking care, I unpinned the small waterproof recorder from my collar. It was still warm from my body. I carefully pressed the stop button, and then the rewind. I had the audio. The full, gloating confession of murder, financial fraud, and kidnapping intent, complete with the specific mention of thallium. I was no longer the unstable, grieving widow. I was a quiet, meticulous operative with undeniable proof. Caleb thought he had trapped me in this remote lodge. He didn't realize he had just trapped himself inside a piece of waterproof plastic. Caleb's threat echoed in the quiet cabin his driver was watching the road. My isolation, which I had always cherished, was now a cage. I couldn't simply drive into town and hand the recorder over to the local sheriff. Caleb's lawyers would immediately argue mental instability, claim the audio was doctored, and tie up the evidence in litigation long enough for him to secure full financial control. The evidence, the physical recorder, had to reach one person, Marcus Thorne, Arthur's trusted corporate attorney in Boston. Marcus had handled Arthur's most sensitive legal matters for years, and was the only person outside the family who knew the full extent of Caleb's ambition and Arthur's countermeasures. The problem of surveillance. The lodge's position was highly exposed. The dirt road was long, and any vehicle leaving would be immediately obvious to Caleb's spy. My phone and computer were compromised. Caleb had, helpfully, installed new security software that I knew was tracking my digital footprint. I had to move the evidence physically without leaving the premises myself. I looked at David. He was 10, bright, and deeply loyal to his father. He was my only asset, and I knew I couldn't risk him, but I needed his help. David, I said, gently pulling him aside while he was playing with his building blocks. I need your help with a secret mission for Daddy. His eyes lit up. Like the missions he used to do when he went on his trips. Exactly like that. This is the most important mission. It's about getting justice for him. I explained to him using simple language that his uncle Caleb had lied and had done bad things to Daddy, and now we had proof. I need to send this small flash drive. It looks like a little thumb drive to Mr. Thorne in Boston, I whispered, showing him the tiny waterproof recorder which I had disguised with a layer of colored clay to look like a cheap children's toy. If Caleb's man sees me leave, he will stop me, but he won't stop the mailman. The counter surveillance. The lodge received mail delivery daily, brought by Mr. Henderson, the elderly postman who drove a beaten-up USPS Jeep. Mr. Henderson never stopped at the house. He left the mail in the roadside box at the end of the driveway 200 yards from the cabin. This box was within sight of the lookout point Caleb's driver would use. I needed to intercept the mailman, but I couldn't be seen doing it. I spent the next morning watching the surrounding woods. I found the perfect path, an overgrown, nearly invisible deer trail that wound through the thick pines ending exactly 50 feet behind the mailbox. This trail was shielded from the main road by a dense stand of spruce trees. My plan was simple, and relied on perfect timing and David's small size. The delivery. On Wednesday morning, I wrapped the recorder in 3 layers of bubble wrap, placed it inside a small padded envelope addressed to Marcus Thorne's Boston office, and sealed it with clear packing tape. I wrote a note. Hold this for Arthur. Do not open or discuss until I contact you. E. I hid the package in the pocket of David's worn canvas jacket. At 10:45 a.m., we heard the familiar rattle of Mr. Henderson's Jeep coming up the road. David and I quickly slipped out the back door and onto the deer trail. Remember, David, I coached him, wait until Mr. Henderson drives away. You put the package in the box, and you run straight back. No talking, no stopping. We crept through the pines. David was a natural, moving silently. I stopped at the edge of the spruce where I could see the mailbox but remain hidden. Mr. Henderson pulled up, dropped the mail, and drove away, kicking up a plume of dust. Go, I whispered. David darted out from the trees. He was quick, his small figure barely visible against the rough wood of the mailbox. He lifted the flag, slid my package into the outgoing slot, slammed the door shut, and sprinted back to my hiding spot. We held hands, our hearts pounding, watching the empty road. 5 minutes later, Mr. Henderson's Jeep returned, collecting the outgoing mail from the box. My package, Caleb's full gloating confession, was safely on its way, hidden among utility bills and catalogs. We returned to the cabin, David triumphant and excited about his mission. Caleb's driver, still parked 300 yards away, was watching an empty, silent lodge. He saw no movement, no panic, and no sign of Ellie Vance leaving her grief-stricken prison. The trap had been sprung. Now the net had to be tightened. The moment David and I returned to the cabin, the anxiety of the surveillance returned tenfold. The recorder was gone, but the signed documents declaring me mentally unfit were still in Caleb's briefcase, and his driver was still watching the road. Marcus Thorne needed at least 48 hours to receive the package and process the explosive audio content. Until then, I had to keep Caleb and his operative completely confident in my incapacity. I needed to start displaying the exact symptoms Caleb had paid his doctors to invent: severe adjustment disorder, with features of incapacitating depression and paranoia. The performance. I began my performance immediately. I needed to send a visible but non-verbal signal to the driver. 1. The appearance. I stopped bathing. I pulled on clothes that were too big and mismatched. I mussed my hair, applied no makeup, and ensured my eyes looked perpetually red and unfocused. When David asked, I simply said, "Mommy is just really tired right now." 2. The erratic behavior. The lodge has large exposed windows. I ensured the driver saw me engaging in strange activities. I spent an hour staring out the window at the river where Arthur died, standing motionless with a vacant expression. Then I would suddenly begin cleaning, aggressively scrubbing a corner of the floor, or rearranging books in the wrong order before stopping abruptly and collapsing onto the couch. 3. The paranoia. This was the most crucial symptom. The paranoid woman would be terrified of being watched. I began systematically closing every curtain and blind in the house, even during the day, plunging the cabin into perpetual gloom. I taped up the small peephole in the front door. I knew the driver wasn't just watching. He was relaying reports back to Caleb, confirming the narrative: Ellie is unstable. Ellie is isolating herself. Ellie is breaking down. The phone call. On Thursday morning, my phone rang. It was Caleb. He was checking in using a tone of false clinical concern. "Ellie, just confirming your well-being," Caleb said, his voice smooth and condescending. "I heard from my people that you've been having some trouble adjusting to life alone. Are you remembering to eat?" I deliberately adopted a thick, slow voice heavily laced with distrust. They said you were here. The shadows. They're watching the trees." "Who is watching the trees, Ellie?" he asked, trying to sound soothing, but I could hear the faint, satisfied amusement in his voice. Your car," I mumbled, lowering my voice to a frightened whisper. "It's parked by the old logging road. They won't leave. They're listening to the walls." "Ellie, there is no one there," Caleb insisted. "You are safe. It's the grief, dear. I've increased your therapy allowance. Just stay inside and sign for the medication I'm having couriered to you this afternoon." He was pushing the narrative hard. He wanted me medicated and docile before the court date. "I don't need your medicine," I insisted weakly. "I need them to leave. They're stealing the air." I hung up abruptly without saying goodbye. The call perfectly reinforced his file. I was delusional, paranoid, and rejecting help. Caleb was pleased. He had his evidence for the court. The couriered trap. At 3:00 p.m., a courier van pulled up, not the driver, but a professional shipping service. The driver delivered a small, unmarked box. Inside were 2 prescription bottles, one for a mild sedative, and one for anti-anxiety medication. But there was something else tucked underneath the paperwork, was a single plain white envelope. Inside, I found a black and white photograph of Arthur's wrecked kayak, splintered and mangled, pulled from the river. There was no note. It was a deliberate, cruel taunt. Caleb was reminding me of his power and his guilt. It was meant to push me over the edge into genuine hysterics. I stared at the photo, feeling the raw, searing pain of loss. I let the tears fall this time. They were real, not part of the act. I allowed myself 10 minutes of true, unadulterated grief. Then I wiped my eyes, put the horrific photo in the fireplace, and pulled out my small satellite radio, the one device Caleb hadn't tracked because it didn't use Wi-Fi or cellular service. I tuned to a secure, prearranged frequency and left a brief coded message. "Delivery confirmed. Initiating countdown. Status red alert." It was a message for Marcus Thorne. The recorder had arrived. The countdown to Caleb's downfall had begun. I just had to survive the next 24 hours of paranoia. I didn't hear back from Marcus Thorne immediately after sending the coded message, a deliberate measure to prevent Caleb from intercepting an unexpected reply. The anxiety of the wait was almost unbearable, but I held fast to my routine, the gloom, the erratic cleaning, the calculated paranoia. On Friday morning, I finally received confirmation. It came not through the radio or phone, but through the regular physical mail, the one channel Caleb had dismissed as too slow and irrelevant for urgent communication. Tucked into the junk mail was a thick, glossy catalog for high-end corporate retreats. Inside, on page 43, describing the executive suite's amenities, one sentence was subtly highlighted with a faint yellow marker. "The safety deposit boxes are accessible 24 hours a day with valid photo identification. Your appointment is scheduled for next Tuesday at 9 a.m. MST. Bring the key." Next Tuesday, 9 a.m. MST Mountain Standard Time. Marcus had received the recorder, processed the audio, and was setting the date for the confrontation. He needed the court hearing, the key to unlock the trap. The court summons. The confirmation was timely. An hour later, a process server, a new face, not Caleb's driver, drove up and served me with the official court summons. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning, just 3 days away. The document confirmed what Caleb had told me. The hearing was to finalize my incapacity and officially transfer guardianship of David and the estate to Caleb. I was meant to appear looking unstable and fragile, confirming the doctor's reports. I called Marcus Thorne using a newly acquired, untraceable satellite phone I had secreted away for this moment. "Marcus, I have the date. Monday morning," I said, my voice crisp and focused. "Ellie, thank the gods. I have the audio." Marcus confirmed, his voice tight with professional anger. "It is horrifying. He confessed to everything, the thallium, the staged accident, the financial motive. It's an airtight case for murder, one, and criminal fraud." "But we can't present the murder charge yet," I reminded him. "If we do, he'll fight the audio's admissibility, and the court will immediately seize the estate as evidence, leaving David and me with nothing. We need to go after the guardianship hearing first." The counter-motion Marcus understood. Caleb had used the civil court to legitimize his criminal actions. We had to use the same court to expose them. "The plan is set," Marcus said. "I'll arrive in Montana Sunday night, completely under the radar. I'm filing a motion to dismiss and a counterpetition for immediate fiduciary review on Monday morning, moments before the hearing. I will not be listed as your attorney, but as Arthur's estate representative. This keeps Caleb confident. What about the audio? We don't use the original recorder yet, Marcus explained. I've had the key parts transcribed and certified by a forensic audio expert. I will attach the transcript and the expert's affidavit to the motion as newly discovered material evidence directly relating to the petitioner's motive and fitness. The judge will have to read the transcript before ruling on your incapacity. This was brilliant. Marcus was forcing the judge to hear Caleb's full confession, even the part about the thallium, before Caleb could paint me as paranoid. The civil court would become the stage for a criminal exposure. The final performance. Ellie, this is crucial, Marcus warned. You have to maintain the performance until you walk into that courtroom. Caleb is expecting a fragile, broken woman who can barely speak. Give him exactly that. Let him believe his victory is assured. I looked at David, who was playing quietly, unaware of the legal storm gathering around him. I smoothed down my ratty sweater, pulled the curtains tighter, and let the manufactured exhaustion wash over my face. On Sunday night, I stood by the window watching the empty road. Caleb's driver was still there, diligently reporting back to his employer that Ellie Vance was spiraling exactly according to plan, isolating herself for the final humiliating defeat. They expected me to appear in court looking unhinged, crying and pleading for help. They didn't see the woman who had spent the last week meticulously preparing to use the judge's own process to deliver a murderer's confession. They didn't see the silent tape recording ready to explode their entire world. The hearing was set. Caleb would arrive expecting to become a millionaire and a guardian. He was about to be served with a transcript that named him a killer. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. The county courthouse in Missoula felt a million miles away from the quiet gloom of the lodge. I arrived exactly on time, escorted by a sympathetic elderly female driver. Marcus had arranged a visual flourish meant to convey my need for outside assistance. I committed fully to the role. My clothes were wrinkled, my hair was a mess, and I clutched a crumpled tissue in my hands, keeping my eyes downcast. I moved slowly, appearing overwhelmed by the simple act of walking into the courtroom. The appearance. Caleb was already seated at the petitioner's table, flanked by his legal team, a sharp, expensive woman named Ms. Albright, specializing in high-net-worth civil transfers. Caleb looked triumphant, almost bored, occasionally checking his gold watch. He clearly saw this as a formality. When I was ushered in, Caleb gave me a look of pitying disgust, the look he reserved for objects he had successfully discarded. Marcus Thorne was already in the gallery, dressed anonymously in a dark suit, his presence completely unnoticed by Caleb's team. The judge, Judge Harrison, called the case Vance versus Vance Petition for Guardianship of Estate and Minor Child. Ms. Albright began immediately detailing the psychiatric reports, my erratic behavior, and the signed declaration of incapacity. Your Honor, Albright concluded, Mrs. Vance is clearly unable to manage the vast financial responsibilities of the estate or provide a stable environment for the minor child, David. Her brother-in-law, Mr. Caleb Vance, is a highly qualified fiduciary and the only suitable candidate to assume this responsibility. Judge Harrison turned to me. Mrs. Vance, do you have counsel to present your opposition? I looked up, meeting the judge's eye for the first time, but kept my voice low and trembling. I signed the papers, Your Honor. I'm so confused. I just want David to be safe. Caleb actually smiled, a satisfied predatory gesture. The hearing was going exactly as planned. The intervention. Your Honor, if I may interrupt. A voice cut sharply from the gallery. Caleb's head snapped around, followed by Ms. Albright's. Marcus Thorne rose, walking swiftly to the bar. He was impeccably dressed and radiating quiet authority. My name is Marcus Thorne, and I represent the estate of Arthur Vance, deceased. I am not acting as counsel for the defendant, but I am here pursuant to my duty as the decedent's representative to ensure the integrity of the estate and the welfare of the minor child. Judge Harrison looked confused. Mr. Thorne, this is a guardianship hearing, not an estate dispute. Please state your business. Marcus placed a thick manila envelope on the clerk's desk. Your Honor, I am filing a motion to dismiss the petition for guardianship and a counterpetition for immediate fiduciary review. Attached to this motion as newly discovered material evidence is an affidavit from a forensic audio expert and a transcript detailing the petitioner's true motive. The transcript. Ms. Albright immediately objected, shouting about procedural rules and inadmissibility. Your Honor, this is an ambush. This evidence is hearsay and irrelevant to the petitioner's financial qualifications. On the contrary, Your Honor, Marcus countered coolly, it is directly relevant to the petitioner's fitness. The transcript details his criminal intent, including the poisoning of the decedent, Arthur Vance, to trigger this very trust clause and gain control of the estate. The courtroom fell silent. Caleb, who had gone pale, shot up from his chair. "This is insane. Your Honor, she's delusional. This is the paranoia I spoke of," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She's fabricating evidence." Judge Harrison slammed his gavel down. "Silence, Mr. Vance, Ms. Albright. This is a serious allegation. I will review the evidence." The judge took the transcript from the clerk and began to read. The courtroom was utterly still. The only sound the soft rustle of paper as Judge Harrison absorbed the chilling words. Had to administer the thallium in small, cumulative doses. He never even had a chance when the kayak flipped. The final critical dose. I get the business, the lodge, and full financial control. The crumbled Judge Harrison's expression hardened with every line. When he finished, he didn't look at me. He looked directly at Caleb. "Mr. Vance." The judge's voice was low-laced with cold disbelief. "This transcript alleges you deliberately murdered your brother to facilitate this guardianship petition. Do you deny the contents of this conversation?" Caleb looked at his lawyer, his eyes wide with panic. Ms. Albright, realizing the case had moved from civil to criminal, quickly whispered, "Don't speak." But Caleb was cornered. His composure shattered. "It's a lie. It's a fantasy. She's—" Judge Harrison didn't let him finish. He slammed the gavel again. "The petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice," he declared. "Furthermore, based on the extreme nature of the evidence presented, I am referring this matter immediately to the district attorney and the state police. Mr. Vance, you are ordered to surrender your passport and are forbidden from leaving the state of Montana. The court will appoint a temporary fiduciary to manage the estate pending a full criminal investigation." Caleb's face was a mask of utter defeat. The room dissolved into shocked whispers. The plan had worked. Caleb had walked in ready to claim his inheritance. He was leaving under suspicion of murder. I sat there, crumpled tissue still in hand, no longer trembling with feigned fear, but with the quiet satisfaction of a trap well sprung. The pandemonium following Judge Harrison's ruling was exactly what Marcus and I had planned, but I couldn't afford to relax. The hearing was adjourned, the guardianship petition was dismissed, and Caleb was formally under investigation. But the most crucial piece of evidence, the physical voice recorder containing the original audio file, was still in Marcus's hands miles away from the police. The problem of the original. Marcus met me in a secure private room near the court chambers. He looked exhilarated but grave. "Ellie, that transcript was dynamite," Marcus said, quickly securing his briefcase. "The state police are here, the district attorney is involved, and they are moving fast. They want to interview you, and they want the original recording device." "We can't give them the original yet," I stated, the adrenaline keeping my voice steady. "Caleb's lawyers will tear apart the chain of custody if it comes from me or you. They'll claim it was manipulated or planted after the fact. We need to introduce the original when the legal system is forced to find it." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "The only way to guarantee the evidence is admissible and untainted is for the police to retrieve it from a neutral, secure location that only Arthur knew about. It has to look like the final brilliant move of a dead man." The key and the location. Arthur had always been a step ahead even in death. He had anticipated that his own family might try to compromise his affairs. Years ago, he and Marcus established a protocol. "The key, Ellie," Marcus said, handing me a small, tarnished silver skeleton key tied to a thin leather cord. "This is the key to Arthur's security box at the Denver Financial Depository. That's where the original recorder goes." Marcus then handed me the recorder. I carefully transferred the colorful clay toy into a small velvet pouch. The metal was cold against my palm, the weight of Caleb's guilt almost unbearable. "The police are going to ask you where the original audio file is," Marcus instructed. "You tell them you delivered the audio to Marcus Thorne, Arthur's longtime attorney. Then you tell them the audio you gave me was a backup copy and that the original physical recorder is secured in Arthur's private security box. The one only Arthur could access?" "Precisely. And you tell them Arthur always carried the key to that box with him for emergency situations." The exchange and the interrogation. I took the key and the recorder, slipping them both into a secret zippered pocket inside my purse. Marcus and I parted ways, moving quickly in opposite directions. He drove straight to a different airport, and I waited for the police. State Police Detective Laura Chen met me in a small office. She was sharp, professional, and her gaze was intense. "Mrs. Vance, we have the transcript. It's damning. We need to know where the original recording device is." I gave my rehearsed, measured answer, maintaining a quiet, truthful demeanor, no more paranoia. "Detective, I had to ensure the evidence reached Arthur's attorney, Mr. Thorne, safely. I made a digital copy on my phone and gave him the recorder with the backup file." I paused, letting the information sink in. "But the original—" "Arthur was very private." He made sure the original was secured in his personal security box at the Denver Financial Depository.